Hello everyone, my name is Slade, I'll be your host, and welcome to Star Wars Did You Know? Today's topic is going to seem a little unusual, especially when compared to the normal content on my channel. First and most obviously, it's Disney canon instead of expanded universe canon. However, it's something that I've wanted to do for a very long time, and it's also one of the most controversial parts of the sequel trilogy that I felt could be easily addressed and something that would be fun for everyone involved. So with that out of the way, let's discuss today the MG-100 SF-17 Starfortress, and perhaps one of the most questionable starships we've ever seen in a Star Wars film. Now first and foremost, it's important to establish the goals of this video. The intention is not to just wail on Disney and complain about their material. We're not going to address any of the issues with the sequels beyond the MG-100 itself. And it is not the goal of this video to bring the MG-100 into the expanded universe continuity. It's simply a matter of looking at this ship, looking at Disney's canon, and saying, okay, how can we make this ship better within the context of Disney's own canon, what we know exists within Disney's canon? First and foremost, I think it's important to establish what inspired the MG-100, where the Starfortress comes from. And it's quite obvious to anyone who's really looking into the material behind the original Star Wars and what the sequels have tried to accomplish in being a combination of so nostalgic while at the same time trying to do something new. The MG-100 comes directly from the dogfighting style of combat we see in Star Wars, which originates from World War II dogfights. And the MG-100 clearly is an emulation of the heavy bombers from World War II. Specifically, its other name, the SF-17, is a clear reference to the B-17, which flew during World War II in massive formations which dropped tons of bombs during the war. And personally, I think this is where the design went wrong initially. They tried to recreate that World War II aesthetic far too faithfully. Because yes, while the dogfighting in Star Wars is very reminiscent of World War II, takes very heavy inspiration from that, we also see in the earliest iteration of the movie, the original Star Wars, which is now known, of course, as Episode 4, A New Hope, that missiles are a prominent part of the universe. And while yes, World War II style dogfighting is very much a thing and an aspect of space warfare in Star Wars, that doesn't mean that big, lumbering, heavy bombers have to be completely inept and deliver their payloads via massed bombing runs directly over their intended targets. And it isn't like there aren't ships within Disney's canon that are also equipped with missiles. We, of course, have the XG-1 Starwing, also known as the Assault Gunboat. We have the Raider-class Corvette. We have the Victory-class Star Destroyer, which is also equipped with large missile batteries. And while I'm not sure if the Venator still has its missile batteries that both it and the Acclamator had, their opposite, the Providence class, still has torpedo launchers, even in the new Disney canon. So clearly large missile batteries are still a thing, and able to be used within the new Star Wars, which means there's no reason that you could not have a similar delivery system with the MG-100. In fact, when I first saw the trailers for Episode 8, that's what I assumed these things were going to do. I assumed these were large standoff missile batteries, that they were going to sit back while the fighters protected them and just fire volleys of missiles at the First Order Star Destroyers. And I think that would have been really cool to see. It would have been quite epic, and probably a better idea in-universe than trying to fly your big lumbering bomber directly overhead of a capital ship. Now, of course, when I mention this to people, they'll often bring up the TIE bomber and point out that it too has a bomb bay. It too drops bombs via a chute. In fact, we see it do that in Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, and also the various games and comics it appears in. And this is true. The TIE bomber does, in fact, have a vertical drop bomb bay. Not as expansive as the MG-100, but definitely serving the same purpose. It even drops the same sort of ordnance, proton bombs. However, there is a distinct difference in the utilization of the TIE bomber and the Starfortress, which set the two apart in their level of effectiveness. Whereas, as far as we can tell, the Starfortress exclusively drops vertically stacked bombs from a bomb bay. The TIE bomber only uses vertical drops against largely stationary surface-based targets, whether it's an asteroid surface, as we see in the movies, or in the various games when we see them being used against ground-based forces or facilities. If they're engaging a spaceborne target, if they're engaging a target that is in orbit somewhere or out in space, they use a forward launch system, which you can very clearly see on their secondary hull pod. As far as I know, according to the lore and what we've seen visually, The Starfortress does not have any capability to launch ordnance forwards to engage any target other than in the vertical directly below it, which is a major design flaw, which I think is evidenced fairly clearly in Episode 8. They get torn to shreds by the First Order's TIE fighters, long before most of them can get anywhere near their target. So with these factors in mind, the fact that there are starfighters in the lore that have forward launch ordnance systems, that you can mount those same systems on capital-sized weapons, such as in the case of the Venator and Providence, and also the fact that there are other bombers within Disney's lore that enable forward attack, I think we can design a much better and honestly more effective and intimidating MG-100 very simply. Not by changing the design as a whole, but by changing one very simple thing. However, before we get to that, there is one last thing we have to consider, and that is the artist's vision. What did Rian Johnson intend these things to be? And he answered that in an interview with this quote, where he tells us that he wanted them to be large, big, and not very maneuverable, almost cow-like in the fact that they needed to be protected by the starfighters. The Resistance X-Wings and A-Wings had to defend these craft from the First Order. And that can be accomplished, still, even while redesigning the craft. The scene that they participated in Episode 8 can happen in almost the exact same way, without much betrayal of what he had in mind. So, enough beating around the bush. Let's take a look at what I think a better idea for the MG-100 would have been, what the Starfortress could have been and arguably should have been, to avoid looking so ineffective. And I've got two pieces of amazing artwork by the artist Colorbrand, who I'll be linking down below in the description, to illustrate what I think a functional and deadly MG-100 Starfortress would look like. Here it is, redesigned MG-100 SF-17 Starfortress. Now, the most obvious change, and honestly the only change that has been made, is very clearly the weapons delivery system. Instead of a vertical drop bomb bay that has to be over the target in order to function, you have a massive missile magazine forward-facing. And it is this missile magazine that is going to be the focus of the change. In fact, it is the sole change I would really make to the MG-100 in order to make it an effective bomber within Star Wars. Rather than having to fly directly over a target, risk its defensive guns, or be swatted away by starfighters on the attack run, now you have a powerful weapons platform that can deliver high-power, heavy-hitting ordnance at long range, forcing the enemy to come to it instead of having to go to the enemy. And the best thing about this system, something I personally really enjoy, much like the T-70 X-Wing that we see the Resistance pilots fly, this warhead system on the MG-100 can be modular. You don't have to fire just proton rockets to attack capital ships. You can fire standard concussion missiles, proton torpedoes. You could equip it with various disabling weapons like ion pulse or mag pulse warheads. This one simple change from a vertical drop bomb system to a forward-firing missile magazine turns the Starfortress from something of a comedy ship into an actual viable threat against First Order capital ships, something they need to send their TIE fighters out to eliminate as quickly as possible or risk the devastating attacks that it could launch against them. And even within the context of the movie, the systems could still make sense. It's very easy to recreate that opening scene of Episode 8 with this logic. Very, very easily, in fact. All you have to do is have these things arrive just like they do in the movie, but instead of trying to bum rush a Star Destroyer and drop bombs on a dreadnought, they stand at range and start launching missiles. Those missiles are being swatted down by the defensive batteries of the First Order capital ships and TIE fighters. And the TIE fighters, in turn, attack the bombers, which now have to be defended by the Resistance pilots. And during the melee, we still get to see Paige Tycho, Rose's sister, do her heroic sacrifice. Her bomber's pilot, perhaps, is killed. The sensors don't work. All the other bombers are getting knocked out. Their missiles are not getting through. So what does she do? She takes control of her bomber, charges in, warheads at the ready, and slams that ship right into the enemy dreadnought, eliminating it and enabling her sister and the Resistance fleet to escape. Very little has to change in that moment, and you get a much more effective and intimidating craft. And honestly, a more dynamic scene. Seeing those missiles being launched, seeing the TIEs trying to shoot them down, the defensive guns of the Star Destroyer and Dreadnought trying to shoot them down, the bombers attempting to maneuver while maintaining their target locks. You get such a dynamic scene in that moment that could have been so much more epic. while at the same time giving the sense the bomber was meant to be a threat. It wasn't meant to be just, what is that doing here? This seems anachronistic. No, it is a massive threat to any ship, any target it chooses to point its weapons at. And I think it was a major failing, both of imagination and of design and purpose, on whoever came up with this concept and handed it over to Rian Johnson in the movie. But ultimately, this is just my idea for how the bomber should be designed. And it's up to your opinion whether or not you think it's a good idea. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. The movie has been made, the bombers exist as they do. I just feel this is a missed opportunity to showcase something new that we had not seen in Star Wars previously on the big screen. However, we have what we have, and ultimately, this design of the MG-100 SF-17 Starfortress is purely my own mind on the matter. I turn it over to you. What do you think? Is it a good redesign? Is it a bad redesign? Is the normal bomber that we see on screen just fine the way it is? Should they have used more conventional bombers like B-Wings or Y-Wings instead of this massive bomber? Whatever your thoughts are, feel free to share them. And have no fear, we will be going back to the expanded universe after this. Alright everyone, that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, feel free to like and subscribe. There'll be more content coming. If you've got any questions or comments, by all means leave them and I'll be responding to them shortly. Until next time, this is your host Slade, and this has been Star Wars Did You Know?